away.
I am away. Okay, everybody, find yourself in what is comfortable to you. You might want to shift your hips, uncross your ankles or your knees. And we're going to take just a couple of minutes to arrive together so we can prepare ourselves to be in this conversation, to be in this community today. And so if it's available to you and you wish to, you can also choose to let your eyes rest away from the Zoom screen so that you can have this moment to go inside. Or you can just continue to be looking at us as a beautiful community on your screen, whatever is comfortable for you. But this is your invitation to now go within. And your quickest, most effective way to be able to get in is to connect to your breath. So we're just going to place our focus on our breath and acknowledge the ease in which it continues to work in our favor. Always working with ease in and out. And now that you've brought your attention there to your breath, I'm going to invite you to just see if you can expand it a little. We're not forcing anything, but you're just creating an invitation for that breath to go a little bit deeper down into the belly. And maybe your out breath is a little bit longer, or if so inspired, let out a sigh. And just take this moment to deepen and expand the breath. Because what you do when you deepen and expand the breath is you bring yourself into the present moment. You bring yourself in tune with your heartbeat. And a whole heap of systems in your body just say, oh, thank you for taking this moment. We can actually just tune ourselves. In this time that we're in, there is a lot of energy outside of us that is out of our control. What's going to happen with our governments? What are they doing about COVID? What's happening with the election? What's shifting? Where are my rights? These are all things that live outside of us and influence us. And we have some control, but there's also some that's out of control. Your breath and your presence in this moment is yours. So just taking this moment to anchor in to this moment, to your own personal advocacy, to your own presence for turning up for this conversation today, and allow your whole system to just relax for just this moment. And then in the next breath, in whatever way feels authentic for you, breathe into your belly and affirm a wish you have for the world. It may be your world in your country, whether it's in the UK, Australia, the United States, or for me here in the Caribbean, or it may be the whole world. Anchor that wish into the belly, and as you breathe out, you breathe life into that wish. And returning to your neutral breath, returning to your full physical body and space, returning to us in the screen. And welcome to today's Fearless Chat with Maria and IssueVoter. We're so pleased that you're here.
Yeah. This is a little gesture for those of you who are new. We call this elevated sparkulation. Thank you so much, Deborah. So for those of you who, if this is your first time on our call, my name is Eduardo Placer. I am a story doula, international public speaking coach, and founder of Fearless Communicators. We work with thought leaders on what they say and how they say it. And we found ourselves as a business in March, completely lost, like everybody else on the planet. And what we knew that we could anchor in was the leadership and the thought leadership of our extraordinary clients and our extraordinary community. we are honored that Maria is part of that community. Maria participated in our Your Story Now program, which was all around crafting signature stitches, elevator pitching, but not elevator pitching, storytelling, with an intention to connect with an audience, propel audiences into action. And over the course of the months that we have been in this post-COVID or still COVID context since March, really mining the thought leadership of our diverse community. And we really felt like, as we're gearing up to the US election, an opportunity to zoom in on the conversations that were most forefront of mind. And I know we have a global audience, and a lot of people are tracking all over the world the US election, right? And the first person that I knew we had to have in this conversation was Maria Yuan. So I met Maria, and she is the founder of IssueVoter. We're going to go a lot into detail around IssueVoter and the work of IssueVoter. But I must say, the moment that I met Maria and we had a conversation, I immediately signed up. It was like that clear, like that access to democracy and that access to my representatives and my legislators. I was like, I have to do that. And I think since the time we've met, at least 7 or 8 times, responded to prompts from IssueVoter and been directly engaged with my legislators. And I'm someone who actually interned on Capitol Hill. So I've interned on Capitol Hill when I was in between high school and college. I have an awareness and a knowledge of the legislative process, and I have never been so engaged. So it is because of IssueVoter that I have been. So that is my hashtag Kickball Change celebration of you, Maria, and your amazing organization. So with that, I'm going to pass it on to you to steer this conversation around your amazing work and how we can really make our democracies work for us.
Great, thank you so much. That is amazing. I didn't even know that. So thank you for sharing that IssueVoter has really helped you. So I'm going to screen share here, and I encourage any of you to feel free to type questions into the chat as we're going. We can make this interactive. It doesn't have to be just me speaking. But I do have some slides that I'm going to walk through and share a little bit about myself, what IssueVoter is. But because we're 3 weeks, is it 3 weeks? A little less than 3 weeks away from the election, or from election day, I also have some information in this presentation about getting ready to vote, researching candidates, and also how to make your advocacy more effective. And so I look forward to sharing some of that information with all of you as well. So Eduardo gave you a little bit of a preview about IssueVoter. So I'm going to start off by telling you all a little bit about myself. My dad's family fled communist China. And growing up in the US, my parents always voted. So the value of being civically engaged and our civic duty to vote was something I learned at a young age. And some of you have heard this story, but one of my earliest memories of participating in voting was mock voting in 2nd grade. And that was really the first experience of me getting to feel empowered, and that made civic engagement and democracy fun. I still remember the teacher passing around a homemade ballot box. We all wrote candidates' names on little slips of paper. We dropped it into the ballot box, and then we saw the results, and that was really exciting. And from then, I fast forward almost 15 years, and I went to manage a campaign in Iowa, a state known for its voter engagement. And that experience taught me 2 things. One is that I didn't necessarily want to work in politics. Like many people, I didn't agree with either party 100% of the time. And 2, it really was striking how much politics overshadows what I think is most important, which is policy, the real work that gets done between elections that affects our lives. It was so frustrating that on the campaign, we could not answer what should be a simple question, which was, is my rep actually representing me? And so I'm going to talk through some ways to answer that question for yourself now, especially if you're researching and getting ready to vote. I'd like us all to take a moment to think about an issue that you care about. It could be the environment, it could be racial justice, it could be education, healthcare. There's so many issues that affect us, and we don't always think of them in lockstep with politics. I think that we all care about something, whether or not we're political. And at the end of the day, we are a nation built on laws, and it's policy change which will create the lasting change and the better world that we all envision.
Maria, I'm curious if we can actually take
All right.
I would love to know, Maria, like if we go back to the previous slide,
Oh, yeah.
people can just name, what are the top 3 issues that they care about right now in this election. I just love to know, like, just where people are standing. And I think for those of you that are, I think these apply to the UK, they apply to Australia. Like, I think these issues apply in all of these spaces. I'm just curious just to get a listening for what is top of mind of people here.
I'll type mine.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like there's so many, but I think
those are, well, I care about many things, but
yeah, I care about many things. I think it's interesting. Yeah. So we get civil rights, healthcare, environment, civil rights, healthcare, government ethics, campaign finance reform, civil rights, foreign affairs, environment, racial justice, healthcare, environment, civil rights, healthcare. Yeah. So it's interesting to track. Yeah. Fascinating.
Yeah, definitely. It actually tracks this actually tracks closely to the issues that people on IssueVoter have opted into receiving alerts about too.
Beautiful.
Cool. All right. So we know some of these stats. We may know that. We may know all of them. We may know some of them, but you know, yes, the US, I think, is in a state where our democracy needs to be watched, as we were talking about earlier. And so we know that voter turnout is historically low, even in presidential election years. I found this stat very shocking. 1 in 5 people in the US cannot name one branch in the US government. The other thing that I think is very interesting when we look at youth, because there's often the stat is often shared how youth don't vote and youth aren't engaged. Something that I think is also very interesting about youth is that almost half of youth are not actually registered with a party. And so when we see in the media all of the dramatic narratives around parties, around Democrats versus Republicans, around this candidate versus that candidate, but really what youth are interested in are issues, like many of us. More problems in politics, you know, there's political polarization, which is only growing. There's the problem of money in politics. And we also know that the partisan divide is widening. So what can we do? I mean, all of these things feel like huge problems that are, you know, this big mountain to climb. How do we solve them? But if we really jump forward, I like to imagine a world where our democracy truly represents the people. You know, imagine a world where people know who their representatives are. Imagine a world where people can be informed year-round about policies that affect their lives. And imagine a world where people can make their voices heard in a way that's actually impactful. And Eduardo knows from, you know, working on the Hill that one of those ways is really contacting your reps. You know, petitions, marching, and we'll talk about a little bit of this later. That's something that you can do, but it's definitely not the only thing, and it definitely can't stop there. And so our vision at IssueVoter is that together we can create the world that we want to live in with a democracy that truly represents the people. But what is democracy? Democracy requires our participation, but it's hard to participate. Over 10,000 bills are introduced each session of Congress. It's actually closer to 17,000. Nearly 1,000 of them are voted on, and we only hear about a handful in the news. So this year, for example, we've heard about the CARES Act. Many of us, I mean, I wouldn't expect anyone to know that there are actually over 1,000 bills in Congress related to coronavirus. So if you've heard about just a handful of bills, you've missed 995 bills that Congress is voting on. And so that's really where IssueVoter comes in. We really want to connect the fact that people care about issues to policy and make it easy for people to engage in policy. And we want to make this process of civic engagement accessible, efficient, and impactful. How we do that, you get custom alerts. Eduardo alluded to this earlier. You can send your opinion directly to your rep. Specifically, it goes to the staffer in charge of constituent contact. And then you get a scorecard to show you how to keep your politicians accountable year-round. We try to make the sign-up process super easy. Many of us are on our laptops right now or computers, so feel free to open a tab to IssueVoter and you can follow along. We ask for people's address so that we can find your reps and senators automatically, and then you choose the issues that matter to you. Something that's interesting, I think I should say here, is even if you choose every single issue in these broad categories, you'll probably won't get more than a handful of bills of alerts each week. So don't worry that if you sign up for every single issue, you're not going to be getting thousands of emails. It'll all still be very manageable because we focus on the bills where it matters and where it makes sense to focus. And I'm happy to share more details about that and a little bit more about that in a second. So this is essentially what these alerts look like. We summarize bills into layman's terms with points from both sides. When you click support or oppose, it sends your opinion to your rep. And something I should say that's nuanced is you can click support or oppose directly from your email, and you don't even have to log into the site. So once you're signed up, it actually works directly as an interaction from your email, but you can also go to the website at any time and see all of the bills that we've covered. And I think I see a question here in the chat, which is this open to US citizens who live outside of the US? Absolutely, but you would have to choose an address in the US that you want to orient your action around. So we would be sending your opinions to 2 US senators and 1 member of Congress. The other thing that I think is important to note is actually that it's really open to anyone living in the US, regardless of age or citizenship. So we have a lot of people using IssueVoter who are expats. We have a lot of people using IssueVoter who are high school students. So unlike voting, as a constituent, you really do have the right to make your voice heard year round. So for people living in the US who can't vote, this is another way to really take action. And I think it's a way to take action that's much more specific and tangible sometimes than voting in national elections, which is still something that everyone should do.
Maria, can you zoom in on a piece of it? Because I think as someone who's because you worked on the Hill as well, or did you not work on the Hill?
I have worked for a state rep, not a congressional rep.
Because I think so when I talked to you, the reason why this resonated with me immediately is because people think that who they want to speak to is their congressperson, but they're not going to speak to them. The person who you want to speak to is a legislative aide that is responsible for that issue, right? So they have a team of people. So the fact that it goes specifically to that legislative aide means that's the person who's going to relay it to that's the person who's tracking it to communicate it to the representative. The representative is not looking at the emails.
That's true. That's exactly right. And depending on the office, they might be compiling a weekly summary, a bi-weekly summary, or a monthly summary for the office that compiles like all the different issues that they've heard about from their constituents, the number of times they've heard about specific issues, what side people are on, and then they kind of take all of this information and tally it into a report. The other thing that I think is interesting is that I think there's also a conception out there, a misconception, I guess you could say, that you have to call your rep and that's the only way to get through. I will say that yes, calls are effective, but at the end of the day, when it's getting tallied, a tally mark is the tally mark. So whether you call, whether you use IssueVoter, whether you email, it all actually is being compiled into the same place. You don't get 5 points for calling and like 1 point for emailing. So I thought I would mention that as well. So you can communicate with your reps in the channel that you're most comfortable with. So we send your opinion to your rep, and then you get a scorecard. And this is something that I think is so unique about IssueVoter. It doesn't exist anywhere else, and it's so important because a lot of our action, a lot of our advocacy can sometimes feel like it's going into a black hole. And what IssueVoter does is we actually give you an alert when Congress votes that shows you the percentage of time or that your rep is representing you. And then on specific bills, you get to see what your opinion was, how your rep voted, and whether or not the bill passed. And so this is a sample scorecard page that shows for this particular user, for example, they can see that their rep agrees with them 80% of the time. Something also very interesting, I even just heard this today. People have told me that after using IssueVoter, they are sometimes surprised that their rep is not necessarily representing them as often as they assumed. So if you are a Democrat and your rep is a Democrat, or you are a Republican and your rep is a Republican, it can be easy just to sit back and think everything's fine. I don't necessarily have to engage on the issues I care about year round because I elected a rep that is the same party that I identify with. But many people will see on IssueVoter that that's not always the case. So it really depends on the issue. And some people are surprised by this. And so I think that's also very interesting for even, delving into like your own politics and your own policy opinions on things. And it also makes it even more apparent why voting in primaries is so important. Because politics is so polarized, we may not necessarily feel like comfortable voting for someone of the opposite party in the general election, but the primary elections really are an opportunity to potentially elect a candidate that more closely aligns with you, that's still within the same party. All right, so who's using IssueVoter? People everywhere are using IssueVoter, which is very exciting. So we have people in all 435 congressional districts who have sent their opinions on IssueVoter. And as a direct result, these are some of the impact metrics that we really care about. So as a nonpartisan nonprofit, we're not just a tech startup with, collecting polls to sell your data. We're not just a petition to be ignored by Congress. We really care not only about the actions that people are taking on IssueVoter, but also helping people understand civic engagement and how it can be a really easy part of their life throughout the year. So we know that 30% of our users said IssueVoter is what motivated them to vote in the first place in the midterm elections in 2018. 59% have taken other forms of civic action, which we defined as registering to a vote, attending a town hall meeting, or volunteering for an issue that they care about. 94% have seen bills for the first time, which is not really surprising given the slide I showed earlier, which talked about the fact that there's so many bills that are introduced that we don't hear about. 33% have said that they've changed their voting decision, and 47% have been exposed to new viewpoints. And being exposed to new viewpoints, I think, is especially interesting right now, because we know that we've heard about, the echo chambers, we've heard about people living in their own silos. And the point of that is not necessarily to change people's mind. So as a nonpartisan nonprofit, IssueVoter, we're not an advocacy organization trying to sway people necessarily. But what I will say about that is that at least understanding what the other side is saying can help in conversations that you're having with people that disagree. We've had people using IssueVoter that have even told me, before IssueVoter, I didn't even know there could be another side to this issue. We also partner with other organizations. And because many of you talked about caring about the environment, I think I'll share something very exciting, which is we just created a platform for 1% for the Planet called Voices for the Planet, where supporters and members of 1% for the Planet can support IssueVoter, and then that will help us cover more environment legislation. So I'm excited about that. But if here's the plug, if you know of any organizations that we should connect with, please feel free to reach out to me, share it in the chat, let me know. I'd love to connect. All right. This is just to give you some insight, and this is not something that we have ever really shared before. So this is really like insider insight on some of the things that we're looking to do and why we're looking to do them. So we really want to launch text message alerts. And the reason for that is because then we can reach low-income Americans who don't necessarily have access to smartphones, who don't necessarily have access to broadband internet. We really want to invest in an IssueVoter app so that we can better reach and engage young people. We have a free lesson plan for middle and high school students that I am happy to share with any of you. If any of you know teachers, happy to send that along. But we really want to actually create programming around this lesson plan where we have a dedicated person whose job it is to share the lesson plan, and not just share it, but also track impact from the lesson plan and follow up with students to start to see and study how engaging in civics at a young age actually results in participation in democracy and voting as an adult. Something we are working with a pro bono consulting team with right now is investigating doing language translations. Some of you may know that in the US, there are about 41 million native Spanish speakers, more than the population of Spain. And so we think it's very important to eventually offer IssueVoter in multiple languages. We're pursuing an academic study where we can really test and do some experiments around how engaging in policy between elections actually results in voter turnout. A lot of the voter turnout studies are focused on actions that happen right around election time. And so we think it's important to also think about, are we sharing with people why even vote in the first place, not just how to vote? And then doing video content is also something that we're interested in pursuing to better reach young people. So there's all these different things, all these different needs we have. If you're excited about supporting IssueVoter, you're welcome to make a donation. Even $5 a month actually helps us a ton. If 3 people gave $5 a month, that means that we would pay for Zoom for a year. And so when nonprofits say that every dollar counts, I sometimes think it starts to sound cliche, but now running a nonprofit, it's so true. Every dollar actually helps us send over 150 opinions to Congress. All right. So now I'm going to share a little bit about voting. Maybe we should do a little poll and ask all of you, how many of you have already voted? How many of you are planning to vote? like, have all of you already voted?
So I think people can
Planning on voting?
for the US citizens, for the people who are
Yeah.
in the US. So some people have already voted. I'm planning to vote. You know, it's interesting. I am the child of Cuban immigrants, and there's something powerful to me about voting on election day. Like there's something about the day of, like, standing in line. Like I have this like like I remember when I was 18, the first time I actually voted. Yeah, it was my freshman year of college. I was 18. The first time I voted was in the city of Philadelphia. That like that, and I'm scared of waiting that long. Right? There's a part of me that fears that something goes fakakta, and because I waited to vote on election day, something's going to happen, right? So, and I also voted early in the last election in the US, which was a different experience. So anyway, so I'm conflicted. I'm definitely voting. I just don't know if I'm voting early or if I'm voting on election day. And it seems that a lot
that's
of
so
people
interesting.
are already voted, and some people are planning to vote early. And I know, Maria, what did you do today?
I voted yesterday in person. I voted early. I stood in line. The line was fortunately not very long, so it was a very efficient process, very well run. All right. I'm going to go through this quickly then, since many of you already have a plan to vote, are already registered, and I think you're kind of further along than some people are. But I will say that we've been doing,
because some people, like, we may have relatives in these states, right? We may know people in these states. So I think the awareness of this is not just about us, but it's also who we know, who in our communities we can advocate for. So I think this information is helpful because, again, the laws change state to state.
Yeah, that's the kind of that's the challenging thing about election law, is that it's basically state law. So throughout September, IssueVoter was offering free hands-on webinars to help people vote. I think it's very common to get the constant reminder to vote, and it's very common to get a list of resources to vote. But what we were aimed at doing is actually having people sit down together and complete all these tasks together live. So we'd like open up the browser together, go to the tab, fill in the form. And so as part of that webinar, we also now in the month of October are offering it to specific communities and to companies who want us to do it for their employees. So if you know of any companies or organizations that would like a webinar just for them and for their audience, we're happy to do it. So you can also just reach out to me and let me know. This is something that, just to show everyone, if your state is not listed here, that means you can register online. Usually if you register online, you have to have an ID or a social security number that you type into the form. When I say ID, I mean state ID or driver's license, something like that. And these are the states that do not have online registration. Sometimes what this means is you can find the form online and you can fill it out online, but you still have to print it out and physically sign it and then put it in the post office in the mail. So in the webinar, some of the resources that we cover are registration, mail-in ballots, polling locations, and ballot research. Does anybody want me to go over any of these areas or have any questions about any of these particular pieces?
I'm curious about the ballot research, because I think the other thing that's interesting is that with every state, like I have friends of mine who are in California, and they're like again, it's also structuring of ballots. So in California, like the last thing you vote for is president. But before you even get to president, it's like this issue, this issue, this issue, and how money and corporations are planting legislation for their benefit in that, and the language is super convoluted. So you actually don't know what it is that you're voting for. And I feel like sometimes people find themselves in the ballot, and they're like, I know who I'm voting for president, but they're like 40 other things that I'm supposed to be voting for, and I have actually no idea what I'm gonna vote for here. So I guess I'm gonna guess.
Yeah, no, that's important. I think that's most people. I think sometimes it can feel like embarrassing, or people don't always want to admit that they don't really understand the entire ballot. But I think it's the majority of people who don't understand the entire ballot. And that's totally normal and okay. Because Eduardo, as you mentioned, California will typically have over 20 ballot measures. Texas, this time when I voted, only had 3. And then there's all these candidates that you maybe have never heard of. A lot of judges. In the election I voted in, there were school board candidates. So it was all kinds of things. So vote411.org, which is the League of Women Voters website, and VoteSmart are two resources that I really like in terms of candidate research. I like vote411.org because it will show you every single person on your ballot, as well as the answers that they've given to the candidate questionnaires. VoteSmart's great because it will also show you things like who's funding their campaigns, where their money is coming from, and VoteSmart will also show advocacy organizations scorecards for candidates, and it will also show kind of research around, it has some similar overlap information as Vote411, but they're not exactly the same. So I like using both of them. There's definitely more resources out there than just these two, but these two I think are definitely a good starting point. And here's what I'll say about judges, because judges have always been, at least for me, the one that is the most like mysterious. Like, how do you find out about judges? So in some states, judges run with a party, and some states they don't. So for example, in Texas, when I voted, every judge, you can see if they are Democrat, Republican, Libertarian, etc. But if your state, many states don't have that. So then you just have a name. And so you don't necessarily have that additional information about their party lines. So a couple ideas. One is the Bar Association actually has ratings for lawyers. So that's step one. Step two, you can look at their work history. I mean, I've actually looked up candidates on LinkedIn before and stuff. It's very insightful, actually. It's kind of interesting sometimes. And then you can also look at endorsements. I think looking at endorsements and like organizations that you trust and which judges especially for the judges, because it's really, I think, a lot harder to find out information on them. So those are 3 tips for judges. So here's some information and ways to think about candidates, gather information, thinking about their leadership skills. That's like the thing where, for example, LinkedIn and other resources like that might come in. And also seeking opinions from others, things like endorsements, events. Sometimes there are candidate forums that organizations are doing right now on Zoom that you can tune into. And then here are just some, things to look out for. So I think that the buzzwords is an especially important one to think about, because a lot of times candidates will use buzzwords, but they don't actually say what they mean, or a certain word might have a different meaning for different people. And so there are these broad things that candidates will say, or that might be on their websites or their campaign materials or the ads, and we can't always rely on those things. 2 resources to look at who's funding candidates are Open Secrets and MapLight. So I think those are good websites if you're curious about where are they actually getting most of their funding. You might see that it might be from individuals, it might be from certain issue areas, but those are websites that track contribution information. And so that's a little bit more about the webinar. So again, if anyone is interested in diving into that in more detail, or know a group that wants to dive into that more detail, we can definitely talk about that after. Okay, what happens after the election? So of course, you're going to use IssueVoter, but very specifically, I wanted to talk about some nuances with making your advocacy more effective. And I'm actually going to just share these 3 bills, and here's why. So I think that it also, especially in election season, it's also very easy to think mostly about the politics of it all. But when you look at actual policy, and I wanted to highlight these 3 bills. Is it sharing? Yes. Okay, so I just thought these 3 bills were very interesting, because these are 3 examples where you have Democrats and Republicans on the same side on both sides. So what I mean is, like, for example, this bill, should members of Congress be allowed to use video conferencing to vote? You have an opinion from a Democrat and a Republican on the opponent side. And then you also have an opinion from a Democrat, a Republican, an organization, and another Democrat on the for side. So I think oftentimes the media paints this picture of like, it's always one party against the other. But when you look at individual policy, you start to see that it's not always the case. So here's one example of that. Here's another example of that. This is not a new bill. Like, it wasn't. It's current session of Congress, but it wasn't introduced this year. But something that I think is kind of interesting about it, when we think about the COVID vaccine and like how we're going to handle that, there's already this question that's been around for a while, which is, should we require children to be vaccinated to go to school? And even on this issue, we have opinions from, a Democrat and a Republican supporting the bill, and a Democrat not supporting the bill, which is interesting. And then this one I think is very interesting as well. It's about agriculture. So it's called the Prime Act. And I think agriculture is one of those topics that's like, it's not like a sexy topic that we hear about a lot, but it affects so many things. I mean, we all eat food. We all, it affects the environment, as we know. So agriculture is an issue that, like, the impact of agriculture is so far reaching. And this bill is one, again, where you have like both an independent, a Republican, a Democrat, many different people and organizations supporting it. And then on the opponent side, you have different organizations opposing it. So I just wanted to quickly highlight these three bills because I think they are pretty interesting in that sense. And then, this is where I can talk for a long time about this. Let's see, switched over. This is what I can talk about for a long time.
Well, I think, this is where we can maybe dive in a little bit too. Yeah.
But I think this is like the last, also I think this is the last slide. So here's what I want to say about petitions. They don't work. Okay, I should potentially caveat that with petitions alone don't work. But here's what I would say about the petitions is often they contain unrealistic demands. So they might be about some very broad issue, something very sweeping and far-reaching that isn't broken down into something specific enough that Congress is actually dealing with. They're often addressed to famous politicians. So you'll see these petitions to Nancy Pelosi or petitions to Mitch McConnell. I mean, Nancy Pelosi and Mitch McConnell are not necessarily your rep, right? Like, you may not live in San Francisco. And there's no accountability with petitions because they just go into a black hole in the sense that you sign it and then what happens? You don't often hear back whether or not the thing that you wanted the petition to do actually gets done. And so they're merely a list of names, and petitions are what organizations use to build their lists. There's nothing wrong with an organization needing to build their list. But I think it's really unfortunate that the people signing the petition probably feel like, oh, they made their voice heard, they got this thing done, when really that's actually not the primary purpose of petitions. The primary purpose of petitions is for organizations to build their lists or to kind of like a protest, to just show that there's broad support or broad backing for an issue. But your individual action is so much more important. So here are the tips, I think, to really, make your voice heard in a way that's effective and doesn't even have to take a lot of time. So, I mean, yes, use IssueVoter, but also if you're calling, I included a sample script and I'll kind of point out why the different aspects of the script I think are important. Eduardo, since you've been, worked in Congress, you can let me know if you disagree with any of this. But basically I would say is be a constituent. So don't call a rep that's not your rep. That's like number one. Number two, be specific about the issue you're calling about. So it's fine to call and say that you support healthcare for people, or it's fine to call and say you care about the environment, but that's not really that specific. Being clear and kind actually stands out because the staffers are often inundated with people just yelling and venting at them. So I was in an office once where I was having a meeting with someone, we were sitting at this table in the lobby, and someone called one of the interns. So the intern's on the phone, and 30 minutes later, the intern hangs up the phone, and I kind of turned and said to him, "You been on the phone that long?" And he's like, "Yeah, I was just listening." So a 30-minute phone call of venting, I mean, maybe it makes the person calling feel better, but it's not actually impactful. It's not as impactful as it could have been, I can almost guarantee. And then accountability, actually letting the rep know that you are a voter and you're watching them. It's one thing to say, I care about this. It's another thing to say, I care about this and I'm not going to reelect you if you're not supporting it. So I think that's much more powerful.
I think, Maria, it's so funny. So I worked for a representative in the state of Florida when I worked on the Hill, and I was doing an internship program through the Congressional Hispanic Caucus. So that's how I ended up in this representative's office. And now this is in the mid 90s, right? So I think we're in a different point of technology where people now text and email, that didn't happen. People wrote letters and they called is what happened, right? But what happens is the empathy for the person who's actually answering the phone, like, you don't know who they're talking to. And what happens is that there are people, like I remember there was this guy who would call, and he would call, I think daily or at least multiple times a week, to talk about how aliens had taken over his body and implanted, satellites in his ear, and he could communicate with NASA. And this was like, and he needed legislation. So I mean, it's like, again, it's like, okay, so now you're dealing with this guy. And so the way in which I think this empathy human piece, I think, makes a huge difference. It's like getting related to that person, acknowledging they probably don't have a lot of time. And I think the script that you have is really brilliant, which is like, I'm a person, I'm a human being, this is my name. This is what I do, which gives a little bit of validation for who you are and what you do, like if that affirms it. And then to say specifically what the bill is, I think has the person know this is an informed voter, right? So one, it's efficient for you, like you have a prompt, right? And then I love that I track how they vote, right? Shows that now you're holding them accountable, which I think is important. Like, I'm tracking this. So thank you very much. Have a great day.
Exactly. It doesn't have to take a lot of time. It can be short and sweet, and that's actually most helpful for them as well. Helpful for the staffer answering the phone.
Yeah. So,
and when I say profession identity, what I mean there is like, that's just some context of like why you care about this issue. So you don't have to share much about yourself, but for example, if you are a doctor and you're calling about a healthcare issue or something like that, like sometimes that's helpful for them to know. But you don't really have to tell them too much about yourself unless you want to. And I think letting them know that you'll actually look at their voting record, I think that's huge. And I think that most people do not do that.
Yeah. So we're gonna stop sharing the screen, Maria, so we can come back to our, yes,
we're done.
For a little conversation.
No, I'll put it in the chat.
Yes. So I think I'm curious, like having this frame and conversation. Thank you, Maria, for the thorough conversation, one of understanding IssueVoter, the work of IssueVoter, and then also how we can really mine one, and be responsible ourselves to then also hold accountable somebody else, right? I thought that was really helpful. I'm just curious if there are any questions. Julie, I love that you're on this call. It seems like you've been a legislator. I don't know if you've been on the other side of the receiving of these things. Like, what are the things that work? What doesn't work?
I have, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I thought it was really interesting when Maria, when you both talked actually about, who is the person who's opening the email? Because when I was an MEP, I didn't read my emails. I mean, I had fantastic, I can't, because you get thousands every day. So I had a team of 6 people working for me, and they're reading the stuff. And also, they do the technical work on the actual legislation. That's their job, to be experts in that. So, and I think you're right that most people don't understand that there's a team around the representative. The representative always has to be the person on the stage, the person, the public facing person. But actually the people, and I think that makes staffers actually very powerful to lobby, was always to say you have to get to know the staff. Actually, you have to make the relationship with the staff. So if it was an NGO or a human rights organization, for example, the relationships needed to exist between those organizations and my staff in order for things to happen.
Awesome.
But people do, can I just say, people do respond to, people do, politicians do respond to huge numbers of emails coming in. So we had, when I was first elected in 2014, we had TTIP, which was the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership that was in fact supposed to be between the UN organisations and human rights organisations across the EU, did not want this. And they mounted a really effective campaign. And I voted against it, and it didn't happen. So, and that was largely because of an incredible campaign, not just about petitions and people writing in, but actions on the street, loads of public meetings, person-to-person meetings, the whole thing. Like, if you really want to mount a campaign, you have to use all the different tools that you've got. But numbers, pressure works.
Yeah, and I think that's universal.
Yeah, and people watching you vote. So if we voted on something really controversial, instantly we would have people contacting us. And some people are very clever. They'd know how to get in touch with you on social media. They'd already kind of met you, and yeah.
I'm curious, Maria.
Julie, do you think? Oh, I was going to ask Julie.
No, go for it.
Yeah.
Julie, do you think something like IssueVoter would work in the UK? Like, is there a service that delivers, what Parliament is voting on to citizens?
Yeah. I mean, there are the British Parliament, the UK Parliament. You can see how people vote. So if you put an MP's name into Google, and there is a facility, and you can see how they voted on a whole load of issues that you care about. So, for example, like birth control, or social protection, environmental issues, like everything. In terms, I think that so the mechanism already exists. It's just not very sexy. And I think that is one of the problems. And so what you've talked about today is really vibrant. And I think that's what's missing from a lot of from a lot of existing systems, because governments and parliamentarians know that they are supposed to be transparent. So all these transparent mechanisms are there. It's just they're totally dense and they're really boring, and so somehow we need to kind of sex it up so so people want to actually do it. So I think what you're offering is great.
That reminds me, I want to sex it up. As I think about elections, and I'll share, Julie, back to what Maria said, one of the first issues that I got notification from was around cybersecurity. And what I did is I reached out to one of the experts in our network and I asked her. So like I wouldn't have known that was happening, right? But because I got the notification of it, and even in the reading it on the both sides, it was split, right? So because it's easy, it's lazy for me to say, oh, Nancy Pelosi is saying X, so I'm gonna just follow that. Right. But what was interesting is as I was reading what the proponents and the opponents say, I was like, this is confusing. I'm actually not clear on how I feel about it. So I reached out to somebody who I trusted, who was an expert on cybersecurity. And then she said, that's a great question. And this is how I would anchor and frame. And I was like, that's actually really helpful. And then I notified my legislator. But so there were two things. One, I thought that the fact that it's not cut and dry, it's not black and white. And this is something that I wanted to say, Maria, that you flagged about millennials and independence, right? That they're not in conversations around Democrat, Republican. And I'm interested in, Julie, that this is possibly a UK conversation. And I think what's fascinating is I think what millennials and zennials and lower do is they resist the binary, right?
Yeah.
So it's not, they resist gay, straight, bi. They're like, I'm none. I'm queer. Do you know what I mean? Don't call me Democrat or Republican. I'm political party non-binary. Don't put me in a box. I'm political party non-conforming. Don't label me. And I feel like there are ways in which how we speak about elections, how we speak about parties remains, at least in the United States. I know in parliamentary systems, there's oftentimes more allegiances and alliances that people have to make, but it's not as cut and dry. In the US, I feel like you're Democrat, Republican, it's trapped in this binary. And I think what's interesting, and I think what may be emerging, and one of our friction points that's happening in our democracy, is that the binary no longer works. The binary is not giving voice to people. You have people on opposite sides of the, people who are like the Bernie Sanders camp and the Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez people who are like, Joe Biden, I don't want a centrist. Like, that actually does not speak to me. Like, this is what animates me. And on the right, you can have QAnon, and you have all these other people who are like, I remember we have whoever we have now, but like you would have had like a Mitt Romney or a Jeb Bush, that type of republicanism doesn't speak to me. Like, I want the shit show, right? So like, it's interesting that I think that there is a way in which we are in a friction point. And I think that the shift from party-based leaning to issue-based conversations, I think, is an interesting way forward. So anyway.
Yeah, when you look at independents, so 40% of people are registered as independents. On the campaign side, like in the politics campaign side, I think it's a high percentage. I don't remember the exact number, something like 80%. This is a Pew Research study of those people actually vote one side. So even they're registered as independent, they consistently will vote Democrat, or they will consistently vote Republican. But if you talk to independents, people who are registered as independents on specific issues, it's much more gray. They actually differ on issues, on individual issues, on both sides more often.
Which I think is interesting, because you could have, and I think if we're talking about issues, I mean, you could have people who are fiscally conservative, who are pro-LGBTQ or pro-women's right to choose, so you have all of these that may not be in a blanket like Republican or Democrat kind of context, right? So it is very gray, and yeah, I think that's really interesting. That's having me.
I love yours. I've never heard this phrase, party non-conforming. I don't know if anyone has ever said that before, but you should own that hashtag.
It's part of my whole thing that's emerging around other topics that I'm in deep conversation around, in the ways that we disrupt the binary, right? And I feel like there is an opportunity to shift that conversation. And I'm pretty binary in my politics, as I am in my gayness, but I feel like there's a huge opportunity, because what it invites is a listening, right? And even if you err on one piece, what I think is really beautiful is the resistance of the labeling. Like, I will not be labeled, I am not that. Like, don't tell me who I am. And I feel like there's this interesting friction that's happening right now. And it's, and you could say I'm Democrat non-conforming, or I'm Democrat non-binary, that I think, and the thing is that in our speaking, if we start to disrupt it in these ways, I think that all of a sudden it forces the question. And I think something that's really interesting is the way that I've been tracking through this conversation, this whole idea of being political party non-conforming and political party non-binary, I think is an interesting way to start anchoring identity in the complexity of our conversations around politics. So anyway, this is just that this is a beautiful little seed, a little like peppering of something. I know Deborah has to leave us; she has to bounce to somewhere else, and we are at time, friends. So thank you so much for joining us for our conversation featuring Maria Yuan of IssueVoter. We gather every Thursday in these fearless chats. What we have next week is Jennifer Brown. She's the founder of Jennifer Brown Consulting, and she's a lesbian identifying white woman who is in the diversity, equity, and inclusion landscape. And she runs an amazing organization that does this work all over the United States. There are lots of things that are happening now, specifically in the US, around diversity, equity, and inclusion work. There was an executive order that was passed where they're saying that it's illegal to do conversations around racial bias and to do that type of work. So anyway, there's all government contracts are now like all over the place about how people deliver this conversation. So I think there's a very present conversation around that. And then after that, we have Dr. Maisa Akbar, who's one of our also speakers, who talks about urban trauma and then how we move beyond allyship, right, in conversations about racial equity and justice. I know that Diana reached out because Diana is Australian. So I love that we have Barbados, we have Australia, we have the UK, and this beautiful opportunity to think about how we can engage democracy because I do believe that there are moments in the US where I feel like it's the Lord of the Rings and we're standing on the tip of the needle, you know, and I feel like, you know, and I feel like Brexit, frankly, Julie, was a harbinger. Do you know what I mean? I thought that, you know, when I woke up that morning and I was like, what just happened? You know, and I can only imagine that experience. And I think it's the way many people felt in the United States when Donald Trump was elected, right? So like, you're just like, what planet am I on? This huge, like, you know, need to kind of re-anchor and recalibrate. So there is, so anyway, the invitation, we're here, we're a lighthouse, we're beaming, we love and invite and welcome your participation. And we have a final way in which we close. So Deborah, I know you've got to run. Oh, you can stay. Oh, she's going to be here. Okay, okay, great. So we have a beautiful tradition. So the opportunity is to raise your hand, right? And then this is just the ritual way that we do to close. So we see each other and we thank each other. So we go person to person in this acknowledgement, and then you'll pick it up. So Julie, I see you and I thank you. Thank you for being here with us today.
Laurie, I see you and I thank you.
Thanks, Julie. It was fascinating to listen to you speak about your experiences. Deborah Driscoll, I see you and I thank you.
Maria, thank you, thank you, thank you. I see you, I appreciate you, thank you.
Diana, I see you and I thank you. Thank you so much for being here.
It's really interesting. Thank you. I see you, Ben, and I thank you.
And that leaves us with Eduardo. We see you and we thank you.
And I see you all and I thank you all. Yeah. And the puppy too. Whoever has the puppy, we see and love the puppy too. Yeah. So that completes our call. Julie, did you have another question? I saw you raise your hand. I don't know if
No, but I'm happy to share. I mean, I'm doing this as a volunteer for Democracy Volunteers. There's about 20, maybe 20, 30 people from all around the world participating in this online. We're each doing states. So I'm doing New York, but we're also looking at national issues and we're having lots of interesting seminars. But I'm really interested outside of Democracy Volunteers and what we've talked about tonight. So I'm happy to share my email address. I'm interested. I'm actually co-chair of Urban Economy Forum, which is a project that is coming out of Toronto, but it's a global project. So I think there are some really interesting things that you've talked about tonight that I would be interested in beyond the end of doing this observation. So if I put my email in the chat, you can, if you want to.
And Julie, I just want to reach out and learn more about you because you sound fascinating. So I love, I'm like, that's a yes. So.
Yeah, I was an accidental politician. I was a poet and a theatre maker, and I was very, very angry and put my name down. Never, ever expected to be selected or elected, and then it all happened. So it's
Julie,
interesting.
You're in the right place because we're, as a public speaking coaching business, we're all theater professionals and actors.
Yeah, there you go. Well, isn't that funny? I didn't know that. You were on my list as an event I to attend.
And then here we
are. Some things are meant to be.
Yeah. And Julie, just so you know, Ben and I are both in the state of New York. So if you have any questions around New York, you know, I'll reach out to you and then we can connect you with people also here in New York City. Okay. So again,
it's lovely to meet you all. Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Good luck.
It's late, Julie. It's late in the UK. So thank you for staying up and being with us this late. Okay. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, Diana. Okay, Maria left.